Welcome to today's lesson, Dividing Decimals by Whole Numbers. Today we are going to look at a few strategies that you can use to divide decimals. Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to begin today by dividing 24 hundredths by our divisor, which is going to be 3 wholes. Now, as you can see, we have our dividend, 24 hundredths, also written on this chart to the right. We have our 2 tenths represented and our 4 hundredths to equal 24 hundredths, which we have right here. Now, our first step when we're trying to divide decimals into whole numbers is taking this decimal and immediately moving it into our quotient. That's going to make sure that we keep all of our place values lined up and we don't mess up our decimal values later on. So our next step is to go through the long division process. How many times can 3 wholes go into 0 wholes? Well, 3 is greater than 0, so we put a 0 as a placeholder in our ones place and move on to our next place value, which is our tenths place. How many times can 3 go into 2? If we look at our diagram, we only have 2 tenths, and we can't split 2 tenths into 3 equal groups. So 3 can go into 2 0 times. So now we need to move to our hundredths place. In order to do this, we also need to regroup the tenths in our diagram so that we now have hundredths. That way, we can split our hundredths into 3 equal groups. So I'm going to regroup 1 tenth into 10 hundredths and my second tenth into another 10 hundredths. So I have 24 hundredths in all. Notice, I'm still saying the same value. We just changed our tenths into hundredths. So now I need to divide 24 hundredths into 3 equal groups. 24 divided by 3 equals 8. 3 times 8 equals 24, and when I subtract out, that gives me a remainder of 0. But let's check our diagram to make sure that we did our math correctly. We should be able to split this into 3 equal groups of 8 hundredths each. So I have 4 hundredths, 5, 6, 7, 8 hundredths in my first group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hundredths in my second group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hundredths in my third group. So I have 3 whole groups of 8 hundredths each. Let's practice a word problem together. Sophia bought 2 24 hundredths pounds of gummy bears to share equally with her 3 friends. How many pounds of gummy bears will each person get? Let's start by setting up our problem. We start with our whole amount, which is going to be 2 24 hundredths, and that's going to be our dividend. Since Sophia is going to be sharing it equally with 3 of her friends, that means we're going to have a divisor of 4 because you have your 3 friends plus Sophia. Now we're ready to start with our first step. That's right. Bring up that decimal into your quotient. We can't start dividing until we get that step completed. Next, we see how many times 4 can go into our first number of our dividend. Since 4 is greater than 2, we put a 0 in our ones place and move over into our tenths place. 4 can go into 22 5 whole times. 4 times 5 equals 20, and when I subtract out, that gives me a remainder of 2. Now I'm ready to bring down my 4 from my hundredths place. 4 can go into 24 6 whole times. 4 times 6 equals 24, and I've zeroed out my equation. That means that each friend is going to get 56 hundredths of a pound of gummy bears. Let's try another word problem together. Omar is running a 3 2/10 mile relay race with his 4 friends. Omar says that each person will run close to 1 mile. His friends disagree and say that they will each run about 5/10 of a mile. Who is correct? Well, let's start by setting up our division problem. We know that they're going to be running 3 2/10 miles in all, so we will set that up as our dividend. Now we need to set up our divisor. We're going to have Omar running with his 4 friends, so we're going to be dividing this by 5 wholes. Now remember, our first step is to immediately bring our decimal value up into our quotient. Then we can start with the division process. 5 can't go into 3 because 5 is greater than 3. So we put a 0 in our ones place and move on to our tens place. 5 can go into 32 6 whole times. 5 times 6 equals 30. And then when we bring it down, we still have a remainder of 2. But we don't want a remainder because we're working in the decimal values. So we need to go over one more place value, put a 0 into the hundredths place, and bring down our 0. 5 can go into 20 4 whole times. 5 times 4 equals 20, and when we subtract out, that gives us a remainder of 0. So that means that each friend was able to run 64 hundredths of a mile. But wait, we're not finished. Which number is closer to 64 hundredths? 1 whole or 5 tenths? Don't forget, we need to make sure that we're answering our problem. Well, 64 hundredths is closer to 5 tenths because it's about 1 tenth away, whereas it's about 3 to 4 tenths away from 1 whole. That means that Omar's friends are the ones that are correct because they estimated that each friend would run about 1/2 of a mile. Mabel solved the word problem below. Analyze her work. Is her answer reasonable? Well, let's check it out. A student filled a beaker with 7 2/10 liters of water. He then divided the water equally into 2 containers. How many liters of water did he pour into each container? Well, we can see that she got an answer of 36 liters. But that doesn't really make sense because she only started with 7 2/10 liters. And if she was dividing it equally, her answer should be less than 7 2/10, not greater. Let's see by checking her work and see if we can find out where her error is. So we start with her dividend of 7 2/10, and she set up her problem by putting her divisor as 2 wholes. And, uh-oh, why is her decimal over here? Her decimal should be lined up for her quotient right above the problem. So that's an error right there. We need to move the decimal value over 1 place value. Let's go through and check her work just to make sure there aren't any more errors. 2 can go into 7 3 times. 2 times 3 equals 6. We subtract 7 minus 6 and we get a remainder of 1. She then brought down 2 wholes. 2 can go into 12 6 times. 2 times 6 equals 12, and she zeroed out her equation. So her answer shouldn't have been 36 liters. Her answer should have been 3 6/10 liters. Don't forget, it's very important that you always make sure that your first step is lining up your decimal into your quotient. Let's take a moment to review what you have learned in today's lesson. When you're trying to divide a decimal, you need to make sure that your first step is to always move your decimal value up into your quotient. Then you can continue through your problem just like regular long division. So how many times can 4 go into 5? 4 can go into 5 1 whole time. 4 times 1 equals 4, and when we subtract out, that gives us a remainder of 1. Now our next step is to bring down our tenths place. How many times can 4 go into 12? 4 can go into 12 3 whole times. 4 times 3 equals 12, and we have zeroed out our equation. So dividing decimals isn't very scary, as long as you remember to always start by moving your decimal value into your quotient.